All right, Tabosai, good morning. Let's begin. So today's daf is Mem Aleph. We are picking up at the two dots on Mem Amud Beis. 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. So mutter on this. Well, so remember again, the Mishnah said a very interesting halacha that a person is permitted mutter adam bikrovas saras chaluso. A person is permitted to marry the relatives of the tsar, the co-wife of the woman with whom he did chalitza, but he is not permitted to marry the co-wife of the relative of the woman with whom he did chalitza. So the Gemara says over here, Amarav Tuvi Bar Kisna, Amar Shmuel, Haba al Tsaras Chalutza, if one goes ahead and has relations with the Tsaras Chalutza, the co-wife of the woman with whom you did chalitza, Havlad Mamzer, child is a mamzer. So Gemara says, whoa, my taima, what's the reason for that? Bi'isura kaima. The Rabbi say bi'isura kaima means because she remains in the state of her previous isser. If you look at Rashi is about 2, 4, 6, 8, also about 9 lines up from the bottom. Bi'isura kaima. Chalutzehi de kaima below yivne. V'sulo aval tzarasa kaima aleh be'isr eshes ach. Bikaris Havlad Mamzer. The Gemara makes a very interesting suggestion that the woman with whom you do chalitza, so she is subject to the lav of Asher Lo Yivne. Remember again, we spoke about this before, that once you do chalitza, you essentially are prohibited from going ahead and ever marrying this woman again. However, the woman with whom you did not do chalitza, i.e. the co-wife, she is still considered to be like what? Your brother's wife, and therefore that's an Isser Kares, and therefore were you to have relations with her, ultimately again, and would have a child with her, such a child ultimately would be a mamzer, and such relations would be subject to the din of kares. Rav Yosef says, Af anan anami tanina. We also learn this idea. Mutter ha'adam bikrovas saras chalutzaso. A person is permitted to marry the relative. A person is permitted to marry the relative of the tzara of the woman with whom he did chalitza. So also again, just to illustrate this, Reuven dies, leaves behind 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. So Shimon does chalitza with Rachel. The Mishnah is now telling me that although again Shimon can't marry Leah, but Shimon can go ahead and marry Leah's sister. Marry Leah's relative. So if you say that the tzara is left literally on the outside, if you look at Rashi, he says, So if you say that the other wife, that we'll call her the tzara, is in the original state of Eishes Ach, then mishum hachi mutter ba'achosa. Then I understand the heter. Elai amrit tzara kechalutza damya amai mutter. But if you say that the tzara herself is like a chalutza, then lemaisa again, why should her relatives be mutter? Meaning again, Abosa, what the Gemara is discussing over here is really a much more fundamental issue, which is when you do chalitza with one woman, with one wife, what is the status of the other wives, the co-wives of the deceased? So do we say that the chalitza for one essentially suffices for them all? Or do we say, now let me be clear, everyone's agreeing that when you do chalitza for one, it takes care of the yibum obligation vis-a-vis the dead brother. The shaila is, what's the status of the women with whom you did not do chalitza? So do we say that they're all called a chalutza? Or do we say, no, the one you did chalitza with, she's a chalutza, the other ones are what? The other ones are considered to be the wives of your brother. Now, boss, you'll say to yourself, who cares? What's an nafkamina? Major nafkamina. A man has relations with a woman with whom he did chalitza, that's a lav. That's a prohibition. A man has relations with a woman who is his brother's wife or was his brother's wife, Lamaisa, that's an Isser Kares, right? The difference between, again, a kid who comes from that union could be totally fine from a Chalutza, could be a Mamzer from an Eishes Ach. So that's the Gemara is asking over here. So if you say that when you do Chalitza with one, so Lamaisa, the other one is just a regular Eishes Ach, then I understand why the brother is permitted to marry her relatives. However, again, but if you say that when you do chalitza with one, all of the wives have the status of a chalutza, then why would you be permitted to marry the relatives of the woman with whom you did not do chalitza? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan. Say this is a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says, the Amar, bein hu, bein achin, ein chayav and lo al chalutza kares, v'lo al tzarasa kares. Say that this refutes the position of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that if you have relations with the chalutza, or for that matter with the tzara, that lamaisa there is no din of kares. Amr lecha Rabbi Yochanan would say, 1 second, v'tizbera. Achos chalutza daraisa. 1 second, you're talking about kares. That is a pretty stiff penalty. So mamish, you'd only incur kares if what? If what you're doing is biblically prohibited. But is it biblically prohibited to go ahead and have relations with the chalutza? V'amrish lakish kan shana Rebbe achos gerusha midivrei Torah. Achos chalutza midivrei sofrim. But yet Rabbosai Rebbe stated that what? That if you go ahead and you marry the sister of the woman whom you divorced, that, and assuming that your ex-wife is still alive, that is asr midoraisa. But if you marry the sister of the woman with whom you did chalitza, then what? That's midivrei sofrim. That is only asr midrabanan. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna." So okay, for what say, so that ends that. Now the Gemara asks, "Ma'ishna hai u'ma'ishna hai." So remember again, the Mishnah made a very interesting distinction. The Mishnah said that the man who does chalitza, he is permitted mutar adam bikrovas tsaras chalutza. So he is permitted to marry. Remember again, Shimon does chalitza with Rachel. So the Mishnah says that he is permitted bikrovas tsaras chalutzaso. He is permitted to marry Leah's relatives. However, on the other hand, Aser b'tsaras krovas chalutzaso. Remember we had this case that Lamais again, if he does yibum, if he does chalitza with Leah, Leah has a sister. Leah's sister is married to another man. So once he does chalitza with Leah, he's not permitted to marry Leah's sister either. Let's say Leah's sister has a co-wife as well, okay, whatever her name is, and then Leah's husband dies. So remember the Mishnah said that the same way that Shimon is not permitted to marry Leah's sister because she is the sister of the woman with whom he did chalitza, he's also not permitted to marry the sister's tzara, the sister's co-wife. So why the distinction over here? To which the Gemara says something very interesting. Top of Mem Aleph. Hachta azla bahadala beidina gazru b'hu rabbanan. So we'll say this one. Now, which one is this one? In the case of the sister of the chalutza, it would be very common that when she was coming to do chalitza, who would she bring to Beis Din with her? Right? It's a woman often doesn't want to. You can say it's ma'asim v'chol. People feel awkward going to Beis Din for a whole variety of reasons. So the ma'asim again, who would she bring? She'd bring her sister. So listen to this. And I remember Leah is the widow. So Leah's coming to Beis Din. She has to do chalitza. She's going to bring her sister. And therefore what? It's possible sometimes in Beis Din, or not necessarily in Beis Din they know, but people who look around don't necessarily know who is the chalutza and who is the support. So what's the problem? The problem is if then sometime later on they go ahead and they see Shimon marrying the co-wife of Leah's sister, they're going to think the sister was the one who was the chalutza. And who is Shimon marrying? Shimon is marrying the co-wife of the chalutza. And they will think that something that is prohibited is really permitted. On the other hand, haydelo azla bahadala beidina lo gazu b'hurabanan. On the other hand, what? On the other hand, the other case, which was the case of krovas tsaras chalutza. So when a woman goes to Beis Din, generally who is she bringing with her? She's not bringing her co-wife. She's not bringing her lawyer, right? She's not bringing her co-wife. So because she's not bringing her co-wife, no one is going to think that the co-wife was the chalutza, and because of that, the cholitz, the man who did chalitza, is permitted to go ahead and marry the relatives, ultimately again, of the chalutza. So essentially what the Gemara says, so the distinction is that when the woman is going to be coming to Beis Din as a support for the chalutza, that's where we're concerned. There's going to be a mix-up in the identity. Therefore, her relatives or her co-wife are going to be usher to the cholitz, to the man who's doing chalitza. On the other hand, if the woman doesn't normally come to Beis Din to give support to the chalutza, then by definition, no one will mix up the two individuals, and therefore he'll be permitted in her relatives. Okay, says the Mishnah. Hacholitz liyevimto vinasa achiv es achosa. So I'll say another case. First of all, just if you look. Fine. Okay. Hopefully I explained that clearly enough. Says the Mishnah. Hacholitz liyevimto vinasa achiv es achosa. So what's another interesting case? Let's say. So again, let's keep it easy. Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. So what happened over here? So now Ruvain dies, leaves behind a wife. So what happens? Shimon does chalitza. V'nase achiv es achosa. So we'll say, let's play this out. So Ruvain dies, leaves behind the wife Rachel. Shimon does chalitza with Rachel. Okay, and what happens? V'nase achiv es achosa. And what happens? And then Rabbosai, and then another brother went ahead and married Leah. So remember again, Leah is the sister of the woman who was originally married to Ruvain and now did chalitza with Shimon. And what happens? Umeis, and then husband number 2 died. Right, Shimon died. So what's the halacha? Choletzes v'lo misyavemes. Ultimately, again, that would be a case of chalitza without yibum. Look at Rashi. So, because lemaisa, again, this would be a case of the sister of one's chalutza. Fine. Rashi just points out. Lo miftera. Dimidoraisa ramya kamei. Va'afagav da'achosa kayemes da'achos chalutza eina element divrei sofrim. So we'll say again. Remember, as you're going to see, and it's going to be the theme of the Mishnah, any time that the prohibition between the Yavam and the woman is an Isid Rabbanon, so obviously you can't do Yibam in such a context, but you'll still have to do Chalitza. However, again, going back to our first Mishnah, whenever there is an Isser Da'oraisa that prevents Yibam from occurring, then in that case, what? There's not even any kind of Chalitza. V'chein, similarly, if a man divorced the woman and then what happened? His brother married her sister. So I'll say, for example, Ruvain's married to Rachel, divorces her. Shimon marries Leah, Rachel's sister. No problem, everything's fine so far, except when Shimon dies. Now when Shimon dies, the woman who falls before him in Yibam is who? Is his ex-wife's sister. So what is the halacha? Harei Zipatura. So we'll say, here's the perfect example. What does Harei Zipatura mean? No Yibam, no Chalitza. Why? Because that is an Isser Da'oraisa to marry your ex-wife's sister. So therefore, again, because it's biblically prohibited, no Yibam, no Chalitza. Shomeres Yavam. We actually the Gemara quoted this case earlier. Shomeres Yavam shekidesh achaves achos. We'll say, listen to this case. So now what happens? Ruvain dies, leaves behind the wife Rachel. And let's say again, there's Shimon and Levi. Shimon has not yet done Yibum or Chalitza, has not acted. And what happens in the interim? In the interim, Levi goes ahead and betroths. He does Erusin with Leah, Rachel's sister. So remember, Rachel is the Yevama, waiting for something to happen. Shimon has not done anything. And in the interim, Levi does Kiddushin with Rachel's sister Leah. Okay, so what's the halacha? So the Gemara said, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira Amru, according to the name of Rabbi Yehuda, they said the following, Omrim Lo, we say to Levi, Levi, remember, is the third brother who was Mekadesh, the sister of the Yevama, Omrim Lo, Hamtein Achiyase Achicha Mase. Wait, do me a favor, or actually, don't do us a favor, just do, right? Just listen, right? Don't do anything until your older brother Shimon decides what he's doing. Chalatz la'achiv, if Shimon does chalitza, o konsa, yichnos es ishto. So we'll say, all we need, because we'll say, what's the issue over here? The issue over here is, technically speaking, remember that there's yesh, we paskin, there's yesh zeka, which means that technically speaking, there is a connection between this Yevama and Levi, the third brother, as well, which means that Levi has a zeka connection to the Yevama Rachel, and he's just given kiddushin to Leah, to Leah, to the sister. So therefore, he's in a little bit of a pickle. So we tell him, listen, do us a favor, don't move the marriage forward at all. Rather, wait for your brother to do something. Now, both say, now, no matter what, as long as Shimon does something, whether it's Yibam or Chalitza, that ultimately would then allow Levi to go in and carry through on the marriage. So Chalatz la'achiv al kansa yichnos es ishto. So whether Shimon does Chalitza or whether he does Yibam, that will allow Levi to then go ahead and marry his wife. Meisa hayivama. Similarly, again, if let's say Rachel, who was the widow, who was waiting for Yibam, died before anything happened, yichnos es ishto. Certainly Levi could then go ahead and get married there as well. Meis yava, meaning that obviously we'll say if the Yavama dies, there's no longer a sister issue. If there's no longer a sister issue, you can marry her. Meis yavam. I say, listen to this. Here's where it gets complicated. Let's say same case. Reuven dies, leaves behind Rachel. Shimon is waiting to do Yibam or Chalit. So he just hasn't decided what he's doing yet. In the interim, Levi gives Kiddushin to Rachel's sister Leah. And now what happens? While they're waiting, Shimon dies. Reuven already died. Shimon died. So now what happens, Rabbi? So in that case, the obligation of Yibum is upon Levi, the third brother. The problem, of course, is that Levi also has Kiddushin to Leah, the other sister, to which the Gemara says, Meis Yavam, Yotzi as Ishto beget, in that case again. So Levi has to divorce his wife with a get, meaning the wife with whom, Leah, with whom he gave her kiddushin, ve'eshes achiv bechalitza, and what? And then lemaisa again. Now he has to do chalitza with wife. Rabbi say essentially in that last case he is in a significant catch-22. Why? Because now there is a direct zeka between him and the Yevama. So to do anything with either of these women is problematic. If he marries the one who he gave kiddushin, that'll be achos chalutzaso, the sister of his chalutza, whom he can't marry. He can't do yibum ultimately again with Rachel, because again that'll be doing yibum with the sister of woman with whom he already has kiddushin. And even if he divorces if he divorces Leah and then does yibum, he still can't do that. Why? Because even after you divorce him, you're still usher her sister. So essentially, he has no way out, and therefore lemaisa again, he has to but divorce Leah, the wife who he betrothed, and do chalitza with Rachel. Says the Gemara, my v'chein. What does it mean v'chein? Now remember again, the Mishnah gave two cases in the beginning. The Mishnah said, so first, case number one was Lemaisa, where one brother did chalitza. Ultimately, the other brother married the sister. Then the brother who did chalitza, then the other brother died, and Lemaisa, again, the halacha is that he does chalitza and doesn't do yibum. Yet the second case was a case of gerushin. So why does the Gemara say v'chein? I will say normally when you say v'chein links two cases. The first two cases in the Mishnah are two separate, independent cases. Why do you say v'chein? So the Gemara says v'chein, my v'chein, ema aval hamagarish. You should say, but the one who divorces a woman. Amrei Shlakish, you're right. Kanshan Rebbe, when he taught this Mishnah, used to read it the following: Achos grusha midivrei Torah, achos chalutza midivrei sofrim. The Mishnah is trying to highlight, Rabbosai, is that the sister of a woman you divorced is biblically prohibited, versus the sister of a woman with whom you did chalitza is rabbinically prohibited. So what's the distinction between that? That if a woman if the sister of the woman you divorced falls before you in yibum, there is no yibum, there is no chalitza, there is no process because she's biblically prohibited, versus a woman who is rabbinically prohibited, like the sister of your chalutza, you will still have to go out and do chalitza with. Shomeres yavam shekidesh amar Shmuel. So we'll say, remember again, this was the next case in the Mishnah. So in this case in the Mishnah, Reuven dies, leaves behind Rachel. Shimon is about to go ahead and do Yibum Chalitza. In the interim, Levi goes in as Mekadesh Rachel's sister Leah. So essentially, Abihuda says to Levi, wait, just don't do anything. It's going to be fine. You're going to be able to marry her. Meaning, the only way you won't be able to marry her is if Shimon dies. So as long as Shimon is in relatively good health, right, looks both ways before he crosses the street, then it's fine. You'll be able to marry her. But wait until Shimon does something. So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel says, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. Kediv Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Iboy lehu meisa ishto. Mahu biyevimto. Well, so now this is a very interesting case. So let's say in this context over here, Levi betrothed Leah. Let's say Leah died. Would Levi then be able to go ahead and do yibum? Look at Rashi. Rashi's Mahu biyevimto. Mi amrinan kevan de mesa paka iser achos isha v'sharia. O Dilma Avagav de Paka Iser Achos Isha Kamale be Iser Eshes Ach Hoil V'Nesra Alav Shah Achos B'Shah Shahaiza Zekukal Yavam. Now both say. Now remember again. Understand what the Gemara is asking over here. It's actually a very interesting kasha. In this case here. So Reuven dies. So his wife Rachel falls before his brother Shimon and Levi. Then what happens? Levi goes ahead and betroths Leah, Rachel's sister. Now, when he does that, it's clear that he cannot do yibum under those circumstances. That's clear. Can't do yibum. What happens now if Leah dies? So the shaila is, do we say that now? Look, there's the yibum obstacle has been removed, and technically speaking, Levi is once again able to do yibum. Or do we say that essentially once you are unable to do yibum for any reason, you're out? you're out. And that woman essentially becomes to you like what? Just like your brother's wife. And there is no Yibum eligibility. That's the fundamental kasha. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina have a machlokes. One opinion said, Meisa ishto mutar b'yevimto. So one opinion said, if his wife died, he's permitted to marry the Yevama. Ushmo Ravasi Damar Meisa ishto asar b'yevimto. And the other opinion said, no, Lemaisa, again, once you are prohibited to the Yevama, even if the wife dies, the betrothed wife dies, you still can't do Yibum. Amar Rav, my time at Rav. What's Rav's logic? Remember, Rav is one who says that once the wife dies, you can once again do Yibum. So what's Rav's logic? Mishum dahavi Yevama shehutra v'ne'esra v'chazra v'hutra tachzra le'teira harishon. Rav says, it's not such a big deal. She was permitted. I'm sorry, she was permitted, then, bless you, then she became Asr, and now she's permitted again. So what's the shayla? Meaning she was permitted in Yibum, then she became prohibited in Yibum because you betrothed her sister, now the sister died. So why wouldn't we say that the original ability to Yibum returns? Massive Rav Hamnuna raises a kasha, Gimel Achin, Beis Nisun, Beis Achayos, if you have three brothers, if you have three brothers, two of whom are married to two sisters, ve'echa mufna, and one of them is single. Meis echa we saw this case. Meis echa mi ba'alei achayos ve'asaba mufna ma'amar. So we'll say what happens. One of the brothers died, and the single brother does ma'amar with the widow. Ve'achar kach meis achiv hasheni, and then brother number 2 dies. Okay, well, so now follow this progression. So remember again, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters. Levi's single. Reuven dies. His widow falls for Yibum, and Levi, the single brother, does ma'amar. Fine. Then what happens? Va'achar kach meis achiv hasheni. Then what happens? Shimon dies. I must say, obviously, now that Shimon dies, what essentially is happening here? You have two women, both of whom are sisters, have fallen before Yibum with Levi, and Levi has already done ma'amar with one of them. Now watch this; it gets a little bit more. Va'achar kach meis ishto acharav. And then Rabbi say, what happens? Now, after that, after Shimon dies, Shimon's wife dies after him. So what's the halacha? Meisa ishta acharav, osa yevama choletzes v'lo mis Yevemes. So Rabbi say, what do we say over there? We say that widow, now so who's the remaining widow? The remaining widow is Reuven's wife. Number one, she has to do chalitza and not Yibum. Now Rabbi say, the logic behind that would seem to be why? Because at the moment that Shimon died, Yibum became an impossibility. Why did Yibum become an impossibility? Why? Two sisters. So therefore, once Yibum became an impossibility, what the Gemara seems to be saying is, even if circumstances change, that once again would allow Yibum to occur. Once Yibum is impossible, it remains impossible. The Gemara says, "Amai teheviki Yevama shehotra v'nesra v'chazra v'hotra tachzra le'teira harishon." I don't understand. Why is that? I understand when Shimon dies, why Levi can't do Yibum. There are two sisters, but I almost say good news, right? But the reality is what happens afterwards. Shimon's wife dies also, which means the second Yevama dies. If the second Yevama dies, all that's left is what? Is one Yevama. Why shouldn't he be able to do Yibum? It's true that there was a period of time where Yibum was impossible, but now that circumstances change, Yibum should once again become possible. Seishtik. He didn't have an answer for this. Lebasra Dinafik, after he left, Amar Amaylo Amart, he said to him, why didn't you say the following? Why don't you respond the following? Rabbi Elazar, this is Rabbi Elazar, Da Amar, Kevan Sha'amad Alav Sha'achaz Be'isr, Ne'esra Alav Olamis. Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that once Yibum is impossible, for even just the moment, right? It precludes Yibum from ever occurring. Even if circumstances change again, that would allow Yibum to occur. Once essentially you're out of the parsha, you're out of the parsha. Hadar Amar, furthermore he said, Hadar Amar, Amar da Amar Rabbi Elazar, Heichad lo chazi b'shas nefila. Oh, 1 second. Maybe Rabbi Elazar only holds that if you're out of the parsha when? When Yibum was impossible at the first Yibum moment. Meaning that Rabbi said, let's say at the moment that the husband died, Yibum was impossible. Then I can understand if you say that the Yibum can never be performed. Aval heichad dechazia b'shas nefila mi amar. But at the time, if you were permitted for Yibum at the time when Yibum first occurred, and then something happened that prevented Yibum, but then that circumstance went away, maybe Yibum should once again become permitted. So the Gemara says, Aval heichad dechazia b'shas nefila mi amar hadar. Amar in. He said yes. V'hatanya. Rabbi Elazar Amar Mesa Yevimto Mutar Beisha Mesa Ishto Osi Yevama Choletis V'lo Mis Yavemes. So we'll say, yeah, we learned again that what? That Lamaisa, in the case of the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar says that if the Yevama dies, he's permitting his wife. But ultimately, again, if the wife dies, the Yevama still choletz v'lo misavemes. That was the case we read before. Leimus Shmuel v'Rav Asi da Amri Rabbi Elazar. Perhaps Shmuel and Rav Asi both like hold like Rabbi Elazar, that if you're precluded for one moment, you're totally out of the parasha. To which Shmuel says no. Afilu tema kirabanan. Ad kan lo kamif the Rabbanan Rabbi Elazar el mishud demefila ve'elach lo misar alayhu. All the Rabbanan are only arguing on Rabbi Elazar in this case because from the time of when Yibum occurred and on, there was not an Isser. Aval hecha de Isser. But when the Yibum relationship was Asr at the time, when Yibum first occurred, afi the Rabbanan modu, even the rabbis were still against. Rabbi say, this is actually a very interesting sugya. So the way we paskin is we say, Meise ishto mutter bivimta. So we'll say, essentially, we say the following. The only time that you are fully out of the parsha of Yibum is when circumstances that precluded Yibum were present at the first moment that there was an obligation of Yibum. So for example, if let's say Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, okay, so now what happens? Reuven dies without children. That woman now falls to Shimon for Yibum. What's the halacha in that case? No Yibum, nothing. Let's say again, before Shimon even has a chance to do anything. So Shimon's wife dies. So now Shimon is no longer married to the sister of the Yevama. What do we say in that case? Still no Yibum. Why? Because the Ma'is essentially we gauge the fitness for Yibum at the first Yibum moment. If you could do Yibum at that moment, fine. But if you can't do Yibum at that moment, even if your circumstances change that would allow you to do Yibum, you still can't do Yibum. However, if Yibum was permitted at the time that the husband died, then something happened that prohibited Yibum, but then that circumstance reversed, and now Yibum is permitted again. L'maisa, what we paskin? You can do Yibum. So the only time we create almost like a blanket unfitness for Yibum is when the unfitness is present at the first moment of Yibum. But if Yibum was permitted, then something happened that precluded it, but then that circumstance went away, you could once again do Yibum. Says the Mishnah. Hayevama lo tachlotz v'lo tisyabim. Well, says now we get into some of the mechanistic ideas over here. We actually alluded to this earlier. The Yevama should not do chalitza, not do Yibum, ad sheyesh lo shlosh chadashim, until she has waited 3 months. What we call this havchana. Havchana literally means a period of where you're able to distinction. That's the right word. Distinction, or to be mafchin, right, means to distinguish. Now I want to see she's pregnant. Why don't she's pregnant or not? Now we're going to see that in general, when Chazal make takanas like this, so takanas in general, like in any legal system, you have to, in order for enactments to go ahead and be effective, you have to just apply them blindly. Meaning, so this is the halacha. So it's going to apply. We're going to see even to a woman who cannot become pregnant. So, but nevertheless, the genesis of this law is from this idea that we want to see if a woman's husband died, is she pregnant from her husband or not? Furthermore, v'chein kol sha'ar hanoshim lo yisarsu v'lo yinasu ad sheyiyu lahen shlosh chadash. We'll say it's not a din chalitza yibum. This is any time a woman comes out of a marriage. Anytime a woman comes out of a marriage, she can't do erisin or nisuin. Now, the chiddush, of course, with erisin is what? Now, erisin is just betrothal. Erisin does not allow husband and wife to live together. Nevertheless, the halacha is we don't want a woman entering into any kind of marriage, even betrothal during the first 3 months. Echad besulos ve'echad be'ulos. So we'll say this is true whether the woman is a besula or a be'ula. Now, we'll say, now what does that mean? That'll be, for example, let's say a woman was widowed from erisin. Let's say a woman was widowed from erisin. So generally, we could assume if a woman was widowed from erisin, she's still a basula, right? She didn't live with her husband. So whether she was widowed from erisin, that's the hope, right? That's the hope, right? So whether she was widowed from erisin or she was widowed from nisuin, echad gerushos ve'echad almanos. Whether a woman was divorced, whether she was widowed, echad nisuos ve'echad arusos. Whether she had nisuin, whether she had erisin. In all these cases, the halacha is what? You have to wait 3 months, and wait 3 months for what? Wait 3 months even to get into erisin. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, hanusuos yisarsu, v'ha'arusos yinasu. Rabbi Yehuda says, first of all, not true. If you are coming off of nisuin, You have to wait 3 months to engage in another nisuin. But what? But you can accept erusin. You can become betrothed. You're not living with the man once you accept betrothal. So therefore, even if you are pregnant, that'll come out. So you could accept erusin. Furthermore, if you were widowed or divorced from erusin, Rabbi Yehuda paskins you're permitted to get married immediately. Why? What's the logic there? Because since a woman coming off of erusin did not live with her husband, therefore lamaisa no concern ultimately of pregnancy. Chutz min ha'arusos shebi Yehuda, with the exception of the arusos in Yehuda. This is actually very interesting. What does it mean, the arusos in Yehuda? Mipnei shelibo gaspa. Because ultimately, Chassan and Kala in Yehuda often got very close. And I will say, now we'll see, actually, this is a sugya in Ksuvos. If you look at Rashi for just a moment, it's actually very interesting. Chutz mi arusa shebi Yehuda. This non-parakama de Ksuvos, Yehuda hayu miyachidin hachasan va'akala kodim knisasan l'chuppah kedei she'ei libo gaspa kiloma ragil u'mitzachik ima shelo yiyu boshin bzeh mizeh bebi'ilas mitzvah. Well, there's actually a beautiful idea. In Yehuda, they believe that people should get to know each other prior to getting married. So they wanted the chasan and kala to spend time together, except sometimes people got to know each other a little too well prior to the wedding, and therefore, again, what the Gemara is saying over here is like this. Normally, from Erusin, there's the absolute assumption that she's not pregnant, that she's a basula. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says she doesn't have to wait. If you're widowed or divorced from Erusin, you can get married immediately, even without the 3-month period, except if you are coming off of Erusin in Yehuda. Because if you're coming off of Erusin in Yehuda, then what? Then it's possible that relations did occur. Therefore, she may be pregnant. Therefore, you have to wait the 3 months. However, again, he goes on. Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yossi says that all women could go ahead and do erusin immediately, except for an almana. Why? Amud Beis mipnei evil, because of mourning. Because again, interesting enough. Great, let me take it afterwards if it's okay. So the Gemara Rabbi Yossi says that all women could go ahead and do erusin. Now remember, Rabbi Yossi is technically agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda that lemaisa, if you're coming off of erusin, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to go ahead and get married immediately. There's no chashash of pregnancy. The only issue to Rabbi Yehuda is by an almana. Why can't she get married? Why can't she get married immediately? Because of avelos. Because of avelos. Rashi says, Amud Beis avelos. V'hai kol nashim yisarsu lav miuti arusalina. So the husband Rabbi Yehuda sfir le'dgali avchana. So he goes over here. He says lemaisa. So we'll see how long that period of avelos is. So Yossi just says the amana just shouldn't get married immediately, even if she's an amana from erusin, because she has an obligation of mourning. Says the Gemara, bishlama lo tisyavim shemi yehei avlad ben kayama. So we'll say, now let's go back. Let's go back to the first thing. So what did the Mishnah say? That you should not go ahead and do yibum or chalitza. Do yibum or chalitza you should not do yibum or chalitza for 3 months. So I understand why I can't do yibum. Why can't I do yibum? Because the Maisa, if again the widow, if the sister-in-law is pregnant from her deceased husband, then it turns, not pregnant, it sounds strange when you say that like that. She's pregnant, she got pregnant before her husband died. Not pregnant from her deceased husband. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So let's say she's pregnant from her husband that is now dead. So the Maisa, again, the concern is what? If I do Yibum, if the surviving brother does Yibum, then what? Then the Maisa, again, it turns out that what he thought was Yibum was actually a case of Arayos. So I understand why I have to wait. However, again, elotachlots amai. So, but why can't you do Chalitza? Right? What is the big deal about doing Chalitza? Just do Chalitza. And I will say, I could say like this. I would even say, look at Rashi. I will say, when we say let's do chalitza now, we're not suggesting do chalitza now, let her get remarried. What we're saying is let's just get the chalitza out of the way. Right? I will say, sometimes in these type of situations, there is a conventional wisdom for saying, like, let's take care of the paperwork now. Even if Lamaisa she can't remarry for another 3 months, even if we're going to say you can't remarry for 3 months, we want to see if you're pregnant. Let's just do chalitza now. Get that out of the way, so that when the 3 months are over, if indeed again when the 3 months are over, essentially then you can get married, remarried, no matter what. Right? If you were pregnant, if you're not pregnant, you can get married regardless. So the Gemara says, "Lema teheve tiyufta de Rabbi Yochanan." say that this is a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan. Why? What did Rabbi Yochanan say? The Amar chalitzas me'uberesh shma chalitza. Rabbi say, remember, the fact that we don't allow chalitza during the first 3 months seems to be why? Because Lamaisa, we're concerned that maybe she's pregnant. And if she is pregnant, then again, Lamaisa, the chalitza of a pregnant woman is irrelevant. But yet, it seems to refute Rabbi Yochanan. We had this Rabbi say sugi a few days ago, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that when you do chalitza with a pregnant woman, the chalitza itself is good. But did we not already ask a kash? Meaning, the Gemara is saying, why are you beating up Rabbi Yochanan? Okay, we already asked Rabbi Yochanan beforehand. To which the Gemara says, Meha nami tevi tiyufta. Do we have to go ahead and bring a kasha from him over here as well? To which the Gemara says, Lo, hacha hainu taima shemehe vlad ben kayama. V'nimtseis ata matzricha kruz l'kahuna v'nitzricha. So the Gemara says, because what's the concern over there, Abba saying? What's the issue if we do chalitza and she's pregnant? We spoke about this earlier already. The issue is what? If you did chalitza as a kol. Chalitza as a kol. If now she gives birth, let's say she's pregnant and she gives birth to a healthy baby, then it turns out what? That you have to go ahead and make another announcement. What's the other announcement? When she does chalitza, a chalutza is not permitted to marry a kohen. If it turns out that Lamaisa, she had a viable baby, then what? She's not a chalutza, she's an almana. In which case what? She is permitted to marry a kohen. So now what's going to have to happen is you're going to have to go ahead and make another announcement that she is permitted to marry a kohen. So the Gemara says, okay, then nitzricha. So what's the big deal? So we'll make another announcement, right? We'll put it in every shul's bulletin. Just want to let you know that again, Leah is not a chalutza. She is an almana. Therefore, kohanim, she is available, right? So what is the big deal? Just make another announcement. To which says, I'll tell you what the difficulty is. Dilma ika dahavi bechalitza v'lahavi behachraza umifsaluha min hakahuna. The concern is that there may be some people who are present by the chalitza who will not hear about the subsequent announcement that she is an almana, and they will say that she is still unfit to marry the kohen. I will say the concern is not as much that they're going to say she's unfit to marry the kohen. What's the concern? The concern is that if she does marry a kohen and she has children, there'll be a laws about those kids that lemaisa, again, they are unfit, they are chalalim, unfit for the kahuna. So we'll say, so lemaisa, what the Gemara is saying over here is like this. So the Gemara is saying is, better just to avoid these situations in totality. So just avoid it. And there's a simple way to avoid it. Don't do chalitza. Essentially, we go into a holding pattern for 3 months. Do nothing for 3 months. Let's see how things unfold. I understand that sometimes it's more convenient just to get the chalitza done, but what looks like a convenience on the front end could absolutely cause incredible difficulties on the back end. So the Gemara says, Teinach almana. Now, I understand what you just said in the case of an almana. Meaning, I will say, let's say again, this was Rachel's first marriage. And I understand now we want to wait 3 months. Don't do chalitza now, because if it turns out that she is pregnant, then the ma'isa, again, she's really going to be an almana, and you're going to have labeled her as a chalutza. However, grusha ma'ikal meimar. I will say, let's say Rachel, the widow, this wasn't her first marriage. This was her second marriage. First marriage ended in divorce. Second marriage ended in the death of her husband. We'll say, lemaisa, once a grusha, always a grusha. Meaning, once you are a grusha already, the fact that status is yours, which means what? You can never marry a kohen. So also remember, we just said before that's what the reason we don't want to do a chalitza during the 3 months, even though we're not going to let her get remarried until after 3 months, is why? Because we're afraid that if it turns out that she's pregnant and has a baby and is really an almana, that she can have labeled her as a chalitza. But let's say she's already a grusha. Let's say she's already labeled as a grusha. So then what? Why don't you do the chalitza right now? I am afraid that maybe she's pregnant and she's really an almana and not a chalutza. No, that concern doesn't apply here. Why? Because she's already a grusha. So just do the chalitza right now, get it out of the way. To which the Gemara says, Mishum, I'll tell you why. Mishum de mafsid lehu mezonos. Because I remember, we're going to get into this now, when a woman is waiting for yibum/chalitza, she is supported by the deceased husband's estate. She's supported because remember, she's in a state of limbo. So therefore, again, she's supported by the state. If you do chalitza, as we're going to see, chalitza ends support from the estate. So what you think is doing something good by getting this chalitza thing out of the way actually removes her form of financial support. So teinach nesua. That makes sense if a woman was widowed from Nisuin. Because we'll say if she's widowed from Nisuin, that's when she has support from the husband's estate. Arusa, Gerusha, listen to this. Let's say she's an Arusa Grusha. This is a busy woman. Right? When I was in Arusa Grusha, Grusha means she was divorced from her previous marriage, and now she only had Erisin with the present husband. I will say, if you're widowed from Erisin, you're not entitled to any level of support. Why? Because in Erisin itself, you weren't entitled to support. So let's say again, now you have a woman who is an Arusa Grusha. She's a Grusha from a previous marriage. She's an Arusa now. So we'll say now, when you put all this on the table, there's absolutely no good reason not to do chalitza right now. Because remember, to label her as a chalutza, who cares? She's already a grusha. To say she's going to lose mizonos, she doesn't have mizonos anyway. So would this be a case where we would actually be comfortable doing chalitza now, even at the beginning of the 30 months? Elu mishum Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says no. The truth is we don't want her to do chalitza for another reason. Disanya ma seba adam sheba lifnei Rabbi Yossi. There was a man who once came before Rabbi Yossi. Amar le maholachlos besoch gimel, and he asked Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi, I have the following question. I have a chalitza situation. Can I do chalitza within the 3 months? Amar le lo tachlots. So Rabbi Yossi said, no, you shouldn't do chalitza. V'tachlots umabekach. But really, who cares? What is the big deal about doing the chalitza? To which the Gemara says, Kara alav mikrazeh, said about this man, this particular pasuk, im lo yachbots. The pasuk, by talking about chalitza, says, if the man will not desire to take her as a wife, lakachas hasivimto, ha'im chafetz yavam, which tells us what Rabbi say. When does chalitza take place? Chalitza can only take place at a time when what? When there would be an option of yibum. Kol ha'ole liyibum ole lechalitza. We say that what? Rabbi say the only time the chalitza option should be exercised is when? Is when Lamaisa there's an option for yibum. So we'll say what Rabbi Yossi is saying over here is something very different. Rabbi Yossi is saying you're right. The idea of not doing chalitza during the 3 months is not a din just simply, and you're going to call it a chalutza. Or it's not a din simply in losing mizonos, because we're going to see that the 3-month waiting period for chalitza applies even in cases where the chalutza issue and the mizonos issue is a non-issue. What is the issue, says Rabbi Yossi? The issue is that yibum and chalitza are two sides of the same coin, and therefore chalitza should only be exercised when there is an option for yibum. Therefore, because there is no option for yibum in the first 3 months, and I will say, remember, don't get confused. Obviously, there will be cases where we do chalitza where there is no yibum alternative. We've seen cases like that. But in the purest form, yibum and chalitza go hand in hand. Therefore, the chalitza option should only be exercised when there's a yibum option. And therefore, because yibum cannot be done during the first 3 months, therefore, by definition, chalitza should not be done as well. Masiv Rav Chanina, excuse me. So Rav Chanina raised the kasha. Hasveikos cholzos v'lomis yavmos. So the cases of safek, any cases of doubt, you do chalitza, not yibum. So what's my svekos? What are you talking about over here? Ilema safek kiddushin. If you're talking about a case of safek kiddushin, then Rabbi Rashi says kegon zarok lo achiv kiddushin safek karav lo safek karav lo. If you want to tell me that it's a case, ultimately again of where the brother, let's say Reuven threw kiddushin to a woman, it was safek, was the kiddushin close to her, safek close to him, and then what happens? Then he dies. So then it's not sure should Shimon do yibum or not. So the Gemara said you should do chalitza. If that's the case, you're talking about Milo Misyavmos. Why can't you do yibum in that case? I will say again, Reuven throws kiddushin to Rachel. Safek karov lo. Who is it closer to? Then Reuven dies. So the Bryce has said Shimon, you should do chalitza, not yibum. Why not? Why can't Shimon do yibum? Let him do yibum. There's no problem because I will say why. What's the issue? Let him do yibum. Because why? If Rachel was Reuven's wife, then what? Then it's yibum. And if Rachel wasn't Reuven's wife, then what? Nice girl, right? What's the big deal? So the Gemara says, Ella lav safek shekidish achas mishtei achayos. Rather, what's the case? The case over here is where Reuven was mekadesh 2 women, right? But only one of them. Ve'ino yodeh eze mehen kiddush. It was an open bar at the wedding, right? So what happened? He's not sure exactly which one he was mekadesh. Which woman was he mekadesh? I'm sorry? Correct, 2 sisters. He was thank you. He was mekadesh one of 2 sisters, and not sure which one he was mekadesh. V'katani choletzes, and what's that loch in that case? And now if Reuven dies, so what happens? Shimon does chalitza, to which the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you what the difference over there in that case is. Hachi hashta hasam im yavo Eliyahu v'yomer daha kidesh bas chalitza v'yibam hi. So if Eliyahu Navi were to come and to tell us which woman Reuven was mekadesh, so we'll say then that would be a real case of yibam and chalitza. There'd be the ability to do yibam or chalitza in that case. Hacha over here in the 3 months im yavo Eliyahu v'yomer daha loy abra mi mashkach be v'yadmin Allah. So we'll say, listen to this. So the Gemara says, if Eliyahu Navi were to show up and to tell us, I can tell you definitively that this woman, the widow, she is not pregnant. Would we still allow her to remarry within the 3 months? And the answer is no. So I'll say this is absolutely amazing. What the Gemara is essentially saying is, it's true that the motivation for the 3-month hold period was for pregnancy, but once it is instituted, it becomes a blanket rule. That is the halacha independent of your personal circumstances. So even if you have an Eliyahu pregnancy test. Eliyahu Navi comes along and says, you are not pregnant. You are not pregnant, right? They say the highest accuracy results, Eliyahu Navi, right? So Eliyahu Navi says that you are not pregnant. Lemaisa, again, you still can't get remarried. Therefore, again, what is the Gemara trying to prove? That shows you that in the 3-month period, Yibum is not shaykh bichlal. There is no din of Yibum during the first 3 months. Because there's no din of Yibum, therefore what? There is no din of Chalitza as well. So the Gemara says, Ha-ketana. What's the proof to this? The proof that this 3-month period is just a blanket piece of legislation. Ha-ketana delav bas iburihi va'afilu ha-chitzrich lahamten gimel chadashim. What's the proof to this? So the proof to this is the ketana, that if a girl is married and she's a ketana and she is widowed, what is the halacha? She still has to wait 3 months, despite the fact that what? Physiologically, she cannot become pregnant. Despite that, she still has to wait 3 months. So we see from here that the 3-month legislation is just a hard and fast rule. So we'll say, what comes out from this sugya? What comes out from this sugya is that the 3-month period is a legislative period, even if the pregnancy is not possible, which means that what? Which means Lamaisa, Yibum cannot happen during those 3 months. And therefore, the conclusion of the Gemara is, if Yibum cannot happen, then what? Chalitza cannot either. Because Chalitza could only occur in a situation where Yibum could occur. If Yibum can't occur, as it can't in these 3 months, therefore Chalitza can't occur, and therefore even Chalitza must wait until the end of the 3-month period. All right, so we'll stop over here.